Hello and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture and where you can see these represented in modern day content so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. I managed to get out this week and I threw a hen party for my best pal in Oxfordshire, and I ended up seeing Gary Barlow from Take That by accident, which was really good. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you are truly missing out on one of the greatest boy bands of all time, and I highly recommend you go and listen to Relight My Fire immediately instead of this podcast. But then come back, please. Also, a big bit of amazing news. I've been invited to go on to BBC Radio 2 this week, which is the biggest radio station in the UK. It's absolutely crazy, a big step up from the BBC Essex that I've been doing. Not that I don't love them, and I truly do, but to be invited to Radio 2 is insane. I'm so grateful. But I'm going to be on there on technically Tuesday the 1st of July at midnight UK time, but you can check out on BBC Sounds afterwards or on demand on the BBC Radio 2 website. I'll be doing the Midnight Mastermind segment with OJ Borg, and I'm really excited. It's crazy. 13.2 million people listen to BBC Radio 2, so this might be a really amazing time for the podcast. I hope you're as excited as I am. I'm super excited. And I hope you tune in if you're in the UK and tune in on BBC Sounds if you can elsewhere, if you're interested. Moving on though, from the 90s British pop scene and Radio 2, we are going north and heading into Scandinavia for a peaceful, guardian-type monster, the Fylgja from Norse mythology. The Fylgja is typically described as a spirit and can have a variation of forms, so I'll get into the most common straight off. The most common is that of a beautiful woman, which sometimes can be your own mum or another woman you know, but they look completely identical. However, you wouldn't be able to figure out who it reminds you of. The next common one is that of a dog or wild hound, which is usually white in colour and extremely large in size. The other common ones is that of a predator animal, such as a fox, wolf, bear, or even birds of prey, which is meant to reflect your true nature. Hint hint. Last note on their appearance, they can also appear as balls of flame like a will-o-wisp, but the flame is only for looks and cannot physically hurt you. Importantly though, in any of these forms, no matter which one, it will always be female. They are exclusively a lady monster. The Fylgja are, though, in the most basic of terms, a spiritual guardian for anyone they look after, and every single person in the world has one. They look out for you on a constant basis throughout your life, all the way up to your death, so they're really just your watcher in the wings. However, the most important thing with this monster is that they only usually come to you in dreams. So considering dreams cannot typically hurt or touch you in any way, you are safe from any poking or prodding. Don't worry though, they are completely benevolent to you and are usually referred to as your spiritual twin, guardian or shadow self, and are more than likely just looking out for you. They also tend to only show up before a big life moment, especially your death, which also gives them a reputation of being an omen. The Fylgja are sometimes known to branch out of dreams and appear in the night, however will only appear as a spirit, and usually as a disembodied form of one of your enemies. So that's nice, I guess, super comforting. But if you do see one in the flesh, that is when you are getting a full-blown omen of your upcoming death. But they can show you this in your dreams as well. And in this regard, they are very often heavily associated to fate and are those watchers rather than participants in your life events. The Fylgja cannot act on their own and cannot change, as they are simply a reflection of the person they are attached to. They have been linked to warriors being able to transform or shapeshift into these animal forms in a last stand in some of these epic poems, so they can help you out if you are truly in dire need, but you'd need to be very, very strongly connected to them. It is said, though, that if a Fylgja strays from its original host, it will visit the dreams of others and become a mar, or a mare in English, which is a very literal mythical embodiment of a nightmare, and a very, very bad omen. It is a whole other monster unto itself within a lot of European mythologies. I've covered it within my Night Hags episode if you do want to hear more about it though. So, we talked about the animal forms earlier, but why are there different types and different variations of them? Now, there are a couple of beliefs with this. The first is that the Fylgja were very often linked to clans, and some thought to look after the whole clans rather than one specific person. If they do, they are usually represented by a woman or a totemic animal of that clan. For example, if they're the white wolves or something, it would be a white wolf, for instance. There's also a belief that this actually links to the placenta. Yes, you heard me, placenta, i.e. afterbirth. It's believed that everyone has a spiritual connection to their placenta. I mean, they are very much your life source when you're in the womb. And based on what happened to your placenta after birth, you would have a different form of Fylgja. If your placenta was buried, which was very traditional and still is in a lot of places, then the first thing to cross it would be your Fylgja's form. This could be your mother, and some women would actively bury them underneath the threshold of their homes to ensure this, but it could also be found by a predatory or carrion animal, mostly of course carnivores, so it could even be something as menial as a ferret or a cat or even a mouse, for instance, as well as these really big predators such as bears or wolves. It was also quite traditional to burn your placenta to get rid of all of the traumatic birth memories and put it behind you, which is where you would have the flame will-o'-wisp Fylgja instead. Lastly, in some beliefs, if you get an animal form, it's believed that it's because you are linked to that animal through your values. If you have a fox, you're clever, cunning, tricksy. A bear means that you're more powerful and ferocious. A wolf is linked to warrior, dangers and wilderness. The ox is strength and endurance. An eagle or raven is linked to spiritual insight, specifically to Odin, the god of the Norse pantheon himself, and of course the overseer of everything within the Norse spiritual realm. I personally like the placenta one the absolute best, and I think that's backed up with history, which is even better. But all three of these are completely valid explanations and were used within folklore to explain the form of the Fylgja to you as well. Now, moving on to their etymology, it is super interesting this week, and if you're a long-time listener, you'll know that I love a juicy etymology. The word Fylgja is actually Old Norse, and it means to accompany or follower originally. However, in English, it literally translates to fetch. Not dog-wise. This is super important because in Irish mythology, there's a monster called Fetch, which we probably won't cover in a separate episode, just as a preamble there, but it's very similar to the German doppelganger, for good reason, as you can imagine. It's a very literal copy of yourself. Interestingly though, Fylgja has another meaning. In Icelandic, it means afterbirth or call, based on what I told you about with their origin earlier. You can now see why this all makes sense and links back together. This one is very strong. People talk about the placenta connection. I think this is really super valid and super cool. So the history of these monsters though go back to about the 15th century. So between 1400 and 1501 AD. And we know this because they were written about in the Icelandic sagas. Sagas were really common within the Nordic mythology space, as they were really great tales of heroes, gods and monsters, and the Icelandic sagas are some of the most famous ones. Whilst I did note that this monster is from Norse mythology, and is sourced continuously from Norse mythology, most of the direct sources of this myth actually come purely from Iceland. So you might say that this is an Icelandic monster, but it is very written into Norse mythology as a whole. So it is a good umbrella, but Icelanders out there, I got you, I see you. I do have some stories from these sagas that I can share though. They're not too long, they're not massively in depth, but they're something. Including the most relevant, which is from the Gisla saga. In this story, the hero, Gisla Surson, was visited by two Fylgja, where one represented the good and the other the bad, trying to convince him to act violently once he woke up. Sometimes this story is actually believed to be two different monsters, the Dis and the Hamnya, also monsters linked with fate within the Norse monster mythos. We'll get into them a bit more later on. I'll explain who they are, where you can find out more info. In another story, the hero, Ingolf Thorsteinsson, saw a red horse in his dreams, which he considered to be a very good omen. However, his wife vehemently disagreed, and believed that the horse was actually a mar, and if you remember, that's the English for mare, linking to nightmare. She believed that the red horse represented bloodshed and bloody-mindedness, and begged him not to go to his meeting tomorrow, which was to go and meet with the other leaders of the village to decide on who was going to be chieftain. He ignored her, of course, was elected, but then was very literally immediately assassinated. Like on the spot. Brilliant. Now in reality, dreams are very often linked to the spiritual and the supernatural, as it's a state that we cannot 100% control. Other than if you believe in lucid dreaming, I suppose. I don't believe in lucid dreaming. You can sit there and tell me forever that you've trained yourself to lucid dream. I don't believe you. Throughout mythology though, across the world, dreaming is a spiritual state, and is often a place that is rife with omens, prophecy and magic. Dreaming, nightmares, and generally sleeping is a vulnerable but essential time for all living creatures, so it's easy for good or bad things to sneak up on you, be that in your dreams or within reality. Moving over to other mythical creatures that are similar, I mentioned the Mar and the Dis earlier. The Mar is the embodiment of nightmares within Norse myth, but is often represented as a physical being, much like that red horse in the saga story. The Dis, on the other hand, are very similar to the Greek figures of fate, and they are the protective spirits of Norse clans, so you can see why they are mistaken and super familiar to the Fylgja. I've covered both of these in their own episodes. If you do want more info, the Dis one is probably one of my favourite episodes. It's super interesting. They are a very cool monster, and they're all warrior ladies. In this sleepy spirit category, we also have the Hamnya, who were again guardian spirits, but they looked after a person's luck and happiness throughout life, and they would pass on that prosperity to their family after death, as the Norse considered lifetime prosperity was accrued. They also typically turned up as an animal, so there's a similarity to that too. They are considered the closest thing to Fylgja within the mythology space, and I will cover them in a separate episode at some point, potentially. There might not be enough content, I haven't quite figured it out yet. The Fylgja are also linked to the Draugr, the undead zombie-like monsters of Norse mythology. Not because the Fylgja are zombies, but because they are still protective spirits. They just typically tend to look after buried treasure, and they technically have corporeal bodies. They are animated flesh. There's also the Fetch, which we discussed earlier briefly. It's an Irish myth monster who has a double of their living person, but they are usually taken flatly as a bad omen of death. The Irish mythology space is very full of omens, especially if you just see one, that's it, you're dead. So this is another one of those. There isn't much content on this, so I probably won't cover it in another episode, but it is a really interesting comparison. Lastly, we have the demon, and that is spelled D-A-I-M-O-N, which you may have heard of if you've ever read his Dark Materials, watched the TV show, or seen the Golden Compass. It is very similar, and they are actually from Greek mythology originally, before Philip Pullman. They act as spiritual familiars to every person, and they were considered lesser divinities to the gods. Typically, they were spirit guides, and were souls of great men of the Golden Age of Greece, and were sometimes found in animal forms. But they were actually more often in their human form, and they just kind of follow you around, which I personally would prefer the little ferret that Lyra has in Dark Materials. I can't remember his name. I'm going to look that up right this second. I'll be right back. Pan. His name's Pan, and he's a little ferret. I want one of those. That's what I want following me around. Yes, please. Anyway, speaking of this, let's move on to modern media. If you haven't guessed already, we have absolutely nothing on the Fylgja specifically. Have you ever heard of this monster? Probably not. So we have a bunch of spirit guardian media. So here's a taste of some shows, movies, games you can have a look at for inspo here. For art, I really struggled to find anything, I'm afraid, from anything for a while back, but there are a few bits that you can find from independent artists this week, so I'd recommend having a look through your DeviantArts and such for some gorgeous modern pieces around them. In movies, we have The Guardian Brothers, of course The Golden Compass, Mulan, The Frighteners, 13 Ghosts, Coco, Ratatouille, The Babadook, Moana, The Others, Star Wars, The Sixth Sense, Pocahontas, Frozen 2, Haunted Mansion, City of Angels, The Lion King, and The Conjuring. There's a lot of Disney and a lot of horror films, which I thought was quite funny when I was researching this. For TV, we have Haunting of Hill House, His Dark Materials, The Twilight Zone, Ghosts, Lockwood & Co., Being Human, The Living and the Dead, Misfits, Ghost Whisperer, Ultraman, Gargoyles, My Little Pony and Friends, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, and Pocket Dragon Adventures. In video games, we have ones such as Shin Megami Tensei, Pokemon, Fate/Grand Order, Persona, Town of Salem, Kingdom Hearts, Gigantic, Silhouette Mirage, Legend of Zelda, Jade Empire, Deadly Premonition, Guilty Gear, Beyond Two Souls, Baton Kaitos, Inuzama 11, Mine Zero, World of Warcraft, Terradrome the Game, Rise of the Boogeymen, Shion Saga, and Tokyo Tattoo Girls. I've never heard of that last one. I want to play it. My book recommendation this week is For the Norse Myths, a guide to the gods and heroes by Carolyn Larrington, for a great summary of all the Norse myths, and it's from that same series that I recommended last week. They're really, really good, and they're beautiful books, so big recommendation. Or, for more ghostly goings-on, Ghosts, Trolls and the Hidden People, an anthology of Icelandic folk legends by Dagrun Ósk Jónsdóttir, or A Guide to Ghosts and Spirits from Folklore and Mythology Around the World by David McGill. The former there as well, of course, is more specifically Icelandic, so if you are more interested in the Norse ones and specifically the Icelandic monsters, go have a look at that one. Really recommend. But now it's time for Do I Think They Existed? I'm actually super on the fence with this one because they are kind of a ghost, kind of a spirit, and they're also only seen in your sleep, so it makes them really hard to prove or disprove either way. I have weird dreams, including a specific maggot dream that I have every summer because it's my biggest pet peeve to wake up to in my cat's food bowls, and honestly, it drives me nuts. So who am I to judge what people dream about? I honestly hope my Fylgja isn't a maggot queen, but I'm also pretty sure, and this is a TMI, that my parents chucked my placenta in the bin. So I guess maybe the first thing that passed mine would be like a bin woman. I'll take it, at least she knows trash when she sees it. Sorry, this is a post-recording note. I actually checked with my mum because I felt bad about writing that and I laughed at my own joke, hysterically. And it turns out I was actually born in a hospital unlike my other siblings, and they put my placenta in an incinerator apparently, so maybe mine is like those cool will-o-wisp ones. I don't know, I do have very fiery hair, so maybe that makes sense. Either way, let me get back to the script. But what I really like about this monster is that it has that almost maternal, but certain ethereal air to it. I love the idea of having that guardian animal or person linked to you from birth, through birth, who guides you throughout your life and just keeps an eye on you in your sleep. And that's not creepy, it's pretty cool. When I was researching this one, I actually thought this monster was specific to a certain Scandinavian country. I actually thought they were Swedish. I read somewhere they were Swedish, but it seems all of the Scandi countries had this belief at some point due to the Nordic influence from the Vikings, which makes the idea even better because the concept of Bjorn the Big Viking having a mouse looking after him in his sleep is hilarious to me. But what do you think? Did the Fylgja stalk the sleep of Vikings across Scandinavia? Let me know on social media. I would love to know what you think about this one. I underestimated how much I would enjoy covering this monster. The connection to birth is a super interesting concept, and not one I've seen before in any of our monsters. Maybe the Proniek is the only one I've seen where it's babies and it's linked to maternity and babies. So I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. I really liked this one. Next week though, we're heading over to the beautiful, beautiful Brazil on the other side of the world for a forest trickster and protector. So keep an eye out for backwards facing footprints with me for the Curupira next week. For now, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you're listening on. I've got loads of social media for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast, and the Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod. But I'm now also on Blue Sky under Myth Monsters if you want to find me there, and all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, and you can find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals, they might love me as much as you do. But for now, stay spooky, ask about your placenta, and I'll see you later babes.